Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis Legacy. The sorority secrets of the goddess next door are revealed in this all-new Isis series adventure. Get Isis Legacy in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. In a previous video, I talked about why DC Comics could not be saved. And in this video, I'm going to go in depth with my professional assessment of Marvel Comics and why your Marvel Comics is in better shape than your DC Comics. Now, your DC Comics has been damaged structurally due to over 2 decades of your Dan Didio being in charge at Editorial and practically rebooting the DC Universe into a complete jumbled mess that started with the New 52. However, your Marvel, even though it has suffered multiple reboots, such as the end of the classic Marvel Universe in 1995, which transitioned into Heroes Reborn, and then we entered into the 2000s and we got into the Secret Wars reboot, the Marvel Universe is a lot better structured than the DC Universe. Many of the foundations and core beams that create the structure of the Marvel Universe are still intact, and many of those beams are still solid, and the foundation created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby still is solid concrete. So there is something that a creator can go out here and work with towards rebuilding Marvel Comics, and there is something there that Editorial can work with towards going out here and trying to rebuild your Marvel Comics. The only thing that an editor and creators have to do is they have to go out here and renovate the Marvel Universe by chipping away at all of the bad form that is wrapped around the structure of the Marvel Universe that your Stan Lee and Jack Kirby built. And that's the only part of the labor that's going to be daunting, because your creators and Editorial have to go out here and chip away at all of the what's drywall and all of the broken parts of the other pieces of structure, such as plumbing and heating units that are a part of the Marvel Universe. Now, I oftentimes compare your Marvel Universe to one of these cars that has been decked out with all of these spoilers and all of these different trim pieces. Underneath the car that is the Marvel Universe, there is a solid vehicle, but you have to go out here and sand away all of the Bondo. You have to pull off all of the cladding. You have to pull off all of the big gaudy spoilers and strip away all of the absolutely ridiculous wraps and paint that are on that vehicle. And once you go out here and pull out all of those aftermarket parts that people have placed on the Marvel Universe, there is a solid vehicle that can be driven into the 21st century, where you can have very compelling stories. That's the core of the Marvel Universe. Again, there is a solid structure there, and all it needs is somebody to go out here and chip away at all of the bad form that has been wrapped around the Marvel Universe, I say, ever since about 2001. Now, in 2001, that is where your Marvel really started having problems, because in 2001, that is when Editorial did not make plans to replace talented creators like Kurt Busiek, who had left the Iron Man book and was about to transition off the Avengers book. And there was nobody there to take over books like your Captain America or your other titles that they had just rebooted, like Thor, Hulk, and Spider-Man. And this is where your Marvel started to decline after the success of Heroes Return. Now, the big problem that has always plagued Marvel ever since 2001 has always been Editorial. But these editorial problems go all the way back to 1987, when your Jim Shooter was fired from Marvel Comics. Now, when Jim Shooter was in charge of Marvel Comics, he made sure that the books were maintaining a solid structure, and he made sure that every book consistently flowed from one book to the next, making all Marvel Comics practically accessible from one book to the next. And he made the point that every story is an entry point, and every Marvel Comics practically from 1970s all the way up until 1987 was practically an entry point for a new reader, and this is what created a second golden age for your Marvel Comics in the 80s, which led to the biggest sales period in comics history for Marvel Comics. Unfortunately, your Jim Shooter was fired as the business changed, and a new group of kinder, gentler, softer editors were hired. And as these new, kinder, gentler, softer editors like Tom DeFalco were brought into Marvel Comics, they then wanted to go out here and change the way they approached comics. And as they changed the way they approached comics, what they did was go out here and not really hold up the standards that Jim Shooter was very, very determined to hold. What they did was go out here and loosen the standards because they didn't want to alienate creators, and Marvel had also lost a lot of creators when Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, and Todd McFarlane formed Image Comics. And once they formed Image Comics, that's when we started to see the cracks start to form in Marvel Comics. And those cracks started to form because your Image started selling millions of copies of Spawn, Wildcats, and Youngblood, and Marvel, feeling like they were going to be left behind, started to overcompensate by creating the Extreme era of comics that started from 94 to about 95. And as they created this Extreme era of Marvel Comics, what they did was go out here and change from a traditional editorial model to one where all of the editorial would be focused on different divisions. Now, they would have a division for the Hulk, they would have a division for the Spider-Man books, they would have a division for the X books, and a division for the Marvel heroes. Unfortunately, all of these different editorial teams really did not go out here and help Marvel synergize the way it did under Jim Shooter, and sales dropped as the Extreme era went on, and these Extreme designs that were a part of the 90s really did not catch on with longtime readers. So your Marvel has one of the best catalogs of characters, and that catalog of characters is very rock solid. And the structured origins of those characters have not really been changed too much, so everybody still knows Steve Rogers is Captain America, Peter Parker is Spider-Man, Tony Stark is Iron Man, Bruce Banner is the Hulk. So those core foundations as related to the characters are still there, but the big problem with your Marvel Comics right now is that it is too filled with derivative characters, and like a whole lot of Bondo on a vehicle or a really bad spoiler on a classic car like a Corvette, these derivative characters go out here and they distract the reader from focusing on the main characters of the Marvel Universe. Now, these characters like your Miles Moraleses, your Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvels, your Spider-Gwens, and your Ironhearts, and many others, yes, these were good experiments to see if you could go out here and reach a new audience. Unfortunately, these characters have not gotten over, and many of them are, as I call, creatively totaled. Now, these creatively totaled derivative characters, they take away from what is great about your Marvel heroes and what makes those heroes distinct. And this is what's really keeping many books from really actualizing their sales, because you have all of these derivative characters, and these derivative characters that every time they come out with a book with them, it keeps the reader from connecting with the original characters and their missions. So this is one of the big problems over at Marvel Comics. Again, this is all bad form, but bad form can be removed, similar to removing some bad drywall, and it can be discarded and you can patch that up pretty easy. So that's something a good editor would understand. It's like, okay, we've got these derivative characters that really aren't selling, and they're taking attention away from the core characters that are defined as Marvel. So these characters, they can be removed from the structure, and they can be taken out and replaced by going out here and shoring up the structure of the core characters with some solid form, and the company could go out here and focus itself on the core characters that make up Marvel Comics, and then focus instead, if you want to create new characters, you create new characters with new powers, and like they did back in the early 90s with Darkhawk and other characters that they created in the early 90s. You don't go out here and keep trying to make derivatives of derivatives, because it prevents us from seeing what is distinct about those characters. And again, if you can fix the form at Marvel Comics, you have a better chance of getting people to reconnect with Marvel. And all that's going to take is an editor with vision. But the critical question is, what editor would go out here and have the patience to go out here and do this? Because working with bad form is going to take a lot of work. And just like a contractor, you have to go out here and supervise those specialists who go out here and be able to tear down all of the bad form and all of the bad parts, and discard those bad parts, and then go out here and shore that up with some structure, with some form that is going to stay true to the core of the original structure that was created as related to the missions of the character, and really capture the spirit of what Stan Lee and Jack Lee Kirby created when they created the Marvel Universe. That is the amount of work that is going to be needed to rebuild the Marvel Universe, and it is possible to, as I see it, salvage your Marvel Universe at this point. Your Marvel Universe is in pretty good shape. It is not as structurally damaged as DC Comics, but the whole thing is, does a creator want to spend that time trying to go out here and renovate a Marvel Universe into something saleable, when many independent comic creators have more freedom to go out here and create their own universes and own their own intellectual property? That is the critical question that many creators and editors would have to think about regarding Marvel Comics, because with it being a corporate-owned entity run by Disney, all an editor would get is possibly maybe $55,000 to $100,000 a year for doing all of that work, and all a creator would get is maybe $200 a page if you're an artist, or $110 if you're a writer, and maybe some accolades to your name, but that really does not help you pay the bills. And an independent creator, they have more incentive to go out here and create their own comics, because at the end of the day, even though they aren't making millions of dollars just yet, they can generate wealth because they own their own intellectual property, they own the copyrights and the trademarks for their characters, and they can go out here and generate revenue through either a crowdfunding project or taking their comic direct to the marketplace. So the creators today, after seeing the success of so many crowdfunded books, they are not really seeing the financial incentive to go out here and work towards renovating a Marvel Comics. No, they are seeing your Marvel Comics as a depreciating asset as related to their time. And again, time is the most important thing when it comes down to creating any sort of publication. A lot of creators, they look at the whole concept of time and they realize it's not really worth their time to go in here and try to renovate Marvel Comics, because renovating Marvel Comics takes time out of their life that they could go out here and use for their own intellectual property and generate wealth for themselves. So yes, your Marvel Comics, as I see it, is still salvageable. their merchandising division is in a lot better shape because Hasbro's Marvel Legends continue to sell consistently, and other merchandise based on the MCU sells exceptionally well, and your MCU still has a lot of fans out there, a young base of fans. So there's a lot there at Marvel that can be salvaged, and there's a lot of things that can be renovated. But the whole thing is that many creators look at your Marvel Comics, the publication division, and the jumbled mess that it's in, and they say to themselves that as related to their time and the weak compensation, it's just not worth their time. Yes, your Marvel Comics is in better shape than your DC Comics, but overall, the problems at Marvel, again, when it comes down to time and money, it's just not something many creators want to go and work with. Overall, I mean, things like, man, that can be retconned into a guy from an alternate reality. Things like many of your other derivative characters, they can be spirited away to another universe or something else. And all of these things, again, can be easily fixed. But the whole thing is that does a creator want to, again, spend their time doing this when they could spend their time going out here and creating their own IPs and going out here and making deals on IPs that are going to make them more money than they would working at Marvel Comics. Now, if you want to see me make more comic related videos, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to try my first comic, Esteem No Good Deed, you can find it on Kindle for 99 cents. And my second comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, is coming to Kickstarter soon. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. If you think you've seen scares, get ready for the horror of the hyena woman.